Court chaos in South Africa. Former President Edgar Lungu's family faced off against the Zambian government right outside a courtroom, arguing over burial rights and state interference. Tempers flared, lawyers clashed, and the world watched. What really happened? Balance scale. Tension reaches boiling point in South Africa as Edgar Lungu's family clashes with the Zambian government over the burial of the late former president. Outside the courtroom, supporters, officials, and lawyers exchanged heated words. Collision. What is the family demanding? Zambia. Is the government overstepping? Stop sign. Can South Africa intervene in Zambia's internal state matters? This in-depth coverage by InspirAfrica official breaks down legal arguments from both sides, eyewitness accounts from outside court, what South Africans and Zambians are saying. What's next for the Lungu family? Subscribe now for bold, accurate political reporting. 1. What is the family demanding? The Lungu family, led by former First Lady Esther Lungu and their legal representatives, is demanding the right to bury former President Edgar Lungu in South Africa, specifically in Johannesburg, rather than repatriating his remains to Zambia as insisted by the Zambian government. Their demands stem from a combination of personal, cultural, and possibly political considerations, though specific details about their motivations are not fully detailed in public sources. Based on posts found on X, the family appears to view the Zambian government's insistence on repatriation as disrespectful and an infringement on their autonomy to decide the final resting place of their loved one. Key points of the family's demands include autonomy in burial location. The family insists on burying Lungu in Johannesburg, where he was set to be laid to rest as per their plans. This decision may reflect Lungu's personal wishes, connections to South Africa, or the family's preference for a neutral location away from Zambia's politically charged environment. Respect for family wishes. The family has expressed frustration with what they perceive as the Zambian government's disgusting attitude and demands, suggesting they feel their rights and dignity are being overlooked. Legal protection. The family, supported by their lawyer Makibi Zulu, has sought legal recourse in South Africa by filing an injunction to prevent the Zambian government from forcing the repatriation of Lungu's remains. This indicates a demand for judicial intervention to protect their decision-making authority. Cultural and personal considerations. While not explicitly stated, the family's choice of South Africa may be influenced by cultural practices, Lungu's ties to the country, possibly through residence or personal connections, or a desire to avoid political manipulation of the burial in Zambia. The family's demands are rooted in their belief that they should have the final say over Lungu's burial, a deeply personal and culturally significant decision. Their resistance to the Zambian government's position suggests a broader dissatisfaction with how the state has handled the matter, potentially viewing it as an overreach of governmental authority into private family affairs. 2. Is the government overstepping? Whether the Zambian government is overstepping its authority depends on the perspective one adopts, legal, cultural, or political. The government's actions can be analyzed through the lens of national sovereignty, respect for tradition, and the balance between state and individual rights. Arguments supporting the government's position. National interest and tradition. The Zambian government argues that as a former head of state, Edgar Lungu's burial is a matter of national significance. In many African countries, including Zambia, the burial of a former president is often treated as a state event, symbolizing national unity and continuity. The government likely views repatriation as a way to honor Lungu's legacy within Zambia, ensuring his burial aligns with national customs and public expectations. Legal precedent. The government has taken the matter to court, both in Zambia and South Africa, indicating a belief that it has a legal basis to challenge the family's decision. This suggests that Zambian law or protocol may grant the state authority over the burial arrangements of former presidents, particularly when public resources or national symbols are involved. Public sentiment. Some segments of the Zambian public may support the government's stance, viewing the burial of a former president on foreign soil as a diminishment of national pride or a break from tradition. The government may be responding to this sentiment to maintain political legitimacy. Arguments against the government's position. Infringement on family rights. Critics, including the Lungu family, argue that the government's insistence on repatriation overrides the family's fundamental right to make decisions about their loved one's burial. In many legal systems, the next of kin have primary authority over funeral arrangements, and state intervention could be seen as an overreach, especially if Lungu's wishes align with the family's plans. Political motivations. The dispute occurs against a backdrop of political tension between the current administration of President Hakainde Hichilema and Lungu's supporters. Some ex-posts suggest that the government's actions may be politically motivated, aiming to control the narrative around Lungu's legacy or to marginalize his family and political allies. Disrespectful approach. The family's description of the government's attitude as disgusting points to a perception that the state has handled the matter insensitively, potentially escalating a private matter into a public and legal dispute unnecessarily. Analysis. The question of overstepping hinges on the balance between state authority and individual rights. presidents. If Zambian law or custom grants the government a role in the burial of former presidents, its actions may be legally justified, but could still be perceived as heavy-handed if not handled with sensitivity. Conversely, if the family's wishes align with Lungu's explicit instructions, the government's intervention could be seen as an unjustified intrusion into personal matters. The lack of publicly available details about Lungu's will or Zambia's legal framework for such cases makes it difficult to definitively conclude whether the government is overstepping. However, the escalation to a court battle suggests a failure of diplomacy and negotiation, which could have resolved the issue without public confrontation. 3. Can South Africa intervene in Zambia's internal state matters? South Africa's ability to intervene in Zambia's internal state matters, particularly in this case, is constrained by international law, diplomatic norms, and the specifics of the legal dispute. Legal and diplomatic framework. Principle of sovereignty. Under international law, as outlined in the UN Charter, Article 2(7), states are prohibited from intervening in matters within the domestic jurisdiction of another state. The burial of a former Zambian president, even if it occurs in South Africa, is primarily a Zambian matter, as it involves a Zambian citizen and a former head of state. South Africa's intervention would need a clear legal or diplomatic justification. Jurisdiction of South African courts. Since the Lungu family filed an injunction in a South African court to prevent the burial from being halted, South Africa's judiciary has a role in adjudicating the case based on its own legal system. This is not an intervention in Zambia's internal affairs, but a response to a legal action initiated within South Africa's jurisdiction. The court's decision would be based on South African law, such as property rights, family law, or international private law, rather than Zambian policy. Diplomatic role. South Africa's cabinet has urged both parties to find an amicable solution, indicating a preference for diplomacy over legal escalation. This suggests South Africa is cautious about being drawn into a dispute that could strain relations with Zambia, a fellow member of the Southern African Development Community (SADC). Practical considerations. South Africa's neutral stance. South Africa is unlikely to take a proactive role in dictating the outcome, as this could be perceived as meddling in Zambia's affairs. Instead, it is providing a legal platform for the dispute to be resolved, as the case is being heard in the High Court in Pretoria. Regional dynamics. As a regional power, South Africa has an interest in maintaining good relations with Zambia. Intervening directly could set a precedent that complicates future diplomatic interactions. However, South Africa may facilitate dialogue or mediation, as suggested by its cabinet's call for an amicable resolution. Limits of intervention. South Africa cannot dictate Zambia's internal policies or force the Zambian government to accept the family's decision. Its role is limited to ensuring that any legal proceedings in its jurisdiction are conducted fairly and in accordance with its laws. Conclusion. South Africa cannot intervene directly in Zambia's internal state matters, as this would violate the principle of sovereignty. However, it has a legitimate role in resolving the legal dispute within its borders, as the Lungu family has sought judicial recourse in South Africa. Beyond this, South Africa's involvement is likely to remain diplomatic, encouraging both parties to resolve the issue peacefully to avoid further escalation. 4. Breaking. Lungu family versus GRZ in court. Yes, the Lungu family and the Zambian government are engaged in a legal battle over the burial of former President Edgar Lungu. The dispute has escalated to the courts, with significant developments reported in both Zambia and South Africa. Key details of the court case. South African court action. The Lungu family, including former First Lady Esther Lungu, her children, and their lawyer Mkibi Zulu, filed an injunction in a South African court to prevent the Zambian government from stopping Lungu's burial in Johannesburg. The case was heard in the High Court in Pretoria, with a court showdown unfolding on the day Lungu was set to be buried. Zambian government's legal challenge. The Zambian government has also taken legal action, challenging the family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa. This suggests parallel legal proceedings, possibly in Zambia, to assert the government's position that Lungu's remains should be repatriated. Court halts burial. A South African court has reportedly halted Lungu's burial pending resolution of the dispute, indicating that the legal process is actively influencing the family's plans. Context of the dispute. The court case is a culmination of a broader standoff between the Lungu family and the Zambian government. The family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa has been met with resistance from the government, which views the burial as a matter of national importance. The legal battle reflects a clash between private family rights and state interests, complicated by political tensions between Lungu's supporters and the current administration. Significance. The court case is significant because it sets a precedent for how disputes over the burial of former heads of state are handled in Zambia and potentially across the region. It also highlights the intersection of legal, cultural, and political factors in such matters, with implications for Zambia-South Africa relations. 5. What sparked the court showdown? The court showdown was sparked by a fundamental disagreement between the Lungu family and the Zambian government over the burial location of former President Edgar Lungu, exacerbated by political and cultural tensions. Key Key triggers. Family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa. The Lungu family's plan to bury the former president in Johannesburg rather than Zambia was the initial point of contention. This decision may reflect Lungu's personal wishes, family ties to South Africa, or a desire to avoid political manipulation in Zambia. Government's opposition. The Zambian government challenged the family's decision, arguing that Lungu, as a former head of state, should be buried in Zambia to honor national traditions and public expectations. The government's legal action to block the burial in South Africa escalated the dispute into a court battle. Political context. The dispute occurs against a backdrop of political rivalry between Lungu supporters and the administration of President Hakainde Hichilema. Some ex-posts suggest that the government's actions may be perceived as an attempt to control Lungu's legacy or marginalize his family, fueling the family's resistance. Failure of negotiation. The standoff could have been resolved through dialogue, as noted by analyst Sishiwa in an interview with SABC. The failure to reach an amicable solution, as urged by South Africa's cabinet, led to the escalation of the dispute into a legal confrontation. Broader context. The dispute reflects deeper issues, including the role of the state in private family matters, the politicization of a former president's legacy, and the cultural significance of burial practices in Zambia. The government's insistence on repatriation may be driven by a desire to maintain national unity, while the family's resistance highlights their autonomy and possibly their distrust of the current administration. 6. Key demands from Lungu's family. As outlined in the response to the first question, the Lungu family's key demands include: right to bury Lungu in South Africa. The family insists on burying Lungu in Johannesburg as planned, rather than repatriating his remains to Zambia. Respect for their autonomy. The family views the government's demands as disrespectful and an overreach, seeking to protect their right to make decisions about Lungu's burial. Legal protection. Through their lawyer Makibi Zulu, the family has sought an injunction in a South African court to prevent the Zambian government from interfering with their plans. Alignment with Lungu's wishes. While not explicitly confirmed in public sources, the family's actions suggest they may be acting in accordance with Lungu's expressed wishes, which they believe should take precedence. These demands reflect a combination of personal, legal, and possibly political motivations, with the family seeking to assert their authority over a deeply personal matter. 7. Zambian government's legal position. The Zambian government's legal position is centered on its assertion that the burial of a former president is a matter of national interest, warranting state involvement. Key elements of the government's position. National significance. The government argues that Edgar Lungu, as a former head of state, should be buried in Zambia to honor national traditions and public expectations. This may be grounded in Zambian law or protocol regarding the treatment of former presidents. Legal action. The government has initiated legal proceedings to challenge the family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa, indicating a belief that it has legal authority to intervene. Repatriation demand. The government insists that Lungu's remains be returned to Zambia, likely viewing this as a matter of national pride and sovereignty. Court engagement. By engaging in legal battles in both Zambia and South Africa, the government is seeking judicial support for its position, potentially citing laws related to state funerals or the treatment of national figures. Analysis. The government's position is likely grounded in a combination of legal, cultural, and political considerations. However, its approach has been criticized for lacking sensitivity, as noted by the Lungu family and some analysts. The legal basis for the government's actions is not fully detailed in available sources, but it may rely on Zambian laws governing state funerals or the treatment of former presidents' remains. 8. Public reaction in South Africa and Zambia. Public reaction to the dispute varies between South Africa and Zambia, reflecting different cultural, political, and regional perspectives. Zambia. Support for the government. Some Zambians likely support the government's position, viewing the burial of a former president in Zambia as a matter of national pride. This sentiment may be stronger among supporters of President Hichilema's administration. Sympathy for the family. Others, particularly Lungu supporters, may sympathize with the family, perceiving the government's actions as politically motivated or disrespectful. Political polarization. The dispute has likely deepened political divisions in Zambia, with Lungu supporters framing the issue as an attack on his legacy, while Hichilema supporters see it as a defense of national sovereignty. South Africa. Neutral stance. South African public reaction appears more neutral, with the focus on the legal proceedings in Pretoria rather than taking sides. The South African cabinet's call for an amicable solution suggests a desire to avoid entanglement in a foreign dispute. Media attention. The case has garnered media coverage in South Africa, with outlets like SABC reporting on the court showdown and the broader implications. Limited public engagement. Beyond legal and diplomatic circles, the issue may not have significant traction among the general South African public, as it is primarily a Zambian matter. Broader sentiment. Posts on X reflect a range of sentiments, from frustration with the Zambian government's approach to calls for a peaceful resolution. The dispute has sparked debate about the balance between state authority and family rights, with some viewing it as a test of Zambia's political maturity. 9. Legal experts weigh in. While specific legal expert opinions are not detailed in provided X posts, general principles of law law and commentary from analysts provide insight into how experts might view the case. Potential legal perspectives. Family law and autonomy. Legal experts may argue that the Lungu family has the primary right to decide the burial location, as this is typically a family matter under most legal systems. However, this could be complicated by Zambian laws granting the state authority over former president's burial. International law. Experts in international law might highlight the principle of sovereignty, noting that South African courts can only rule on matters within their jurisdiction, e.g., the injunction filed by the family, and cannot dictate Zambia's internal policies. Cultural sensitivity. Analysts like Sishiwa have suggested that the dispute could have been resolved through dialogue, indicating that legal escalation may reflect a failure of cultural and diplomatic sensitivity. Precedent for state funerals. Legal scholars may examine precedents in Zambia or other African countries regarding the burial of former heads of state, assessing whether the government's position aligns with established norms. Broader implications. Experts are likely to emphasize the need for a balanced approach that respects both family rights and national interests. The case may prompt discussions about the need for clearer legal frameworks in Zambia to handle such disputes in the future. 10. What happens next? The next steps in the dispute depend on the outcomes of the legal proceedings, diplomatic efforts, and the willingness of both parties to compromise. Possible scenarios. Court ruling. The South African court's decision on the injunction will be critical. If the court rules in favor of the Lungu family, the burial may proceed in Johannesburg. If it sides with the Zambian government, the remains may be repatriated. Diplomatic resolution. South Africa's call for an amicable solution may lead to negotiations between the family and the Zambian government, potentially facilitated by regional bodies like the SADC. Escalation of tensions. If the dispute remains unresolved, it could further polarize Zambian politics and strain Zambia-South Africa relations. The government's handling of the issue may impact its domestic and regional standing. Public and political fallout. The outcome will likely influence public opinion in Zambia, with potential implications for Hichilema's administration and Lungu's political legacy. Long-term implications. The case may prompt Zambia to clarify its laws regarding the burial of former presidents, ensuring future disputes are handled with greater sensitivity. It also highlights the importance of dialogue in resolving culturally and politically sensitive issues. Conclusion. The dispute between the Lungu family and the Zambian government is a complex interplay of legal, cultural, and political factors. The family's demand to bury Edgar Lungu in South Africa reflects their assertion of autonomy, while the government's insistence on repatriation underscores national pride and tradition. South Africa's role is limited to providing a legal platform, with its courts and diplomacy aiming to resolve the issue without overstepping sovereignty. Public reactions in Zambia are polarized, while South Africa remains cautious. Legal experts likely advocate for a balanced approach, and the outcome will depend on court rulings and diplomatic efforts. This case underscores the need for clear legal frameworks and sensitive handling of matters involving former heads of state.